Welcome to this screencast on UnitTester, a unit testing and test-driven development framework for 4D version 11. In this series, I will use UnitTester to demonstrate test-driven development. Let's start by getting familiar with the concept of test-driven development, or TDD. TDD is a methodology in which you write tests for functionality prior to writing the functional code. Contrast this with the typical style of writing the functional code first, then either writing a test method to test the code, or launching the application to test its functionality manually. Let's look at the TDD cycle. The first step in the TDD cycle is to create a production method without implementing any functionality. Next, we create a test case method that will contain all of the tests for the production method. Third, we write a single test inside our test case method for functionality not yet implemented in our production method. This test should fail. Fourth, we write only the production code necessary to make the failing test pass. Once our test passes, we can create another test for functionality not yet implemented and repeat this cycle until all functionality is tested and implemented in our production method. For the demonstration, I will be practicing TDD to create a method that converts a text array into a delimited string containing the elements of the text array. Here is what we want the method to look like. It will take two parameters. The first, a pointer to a text array. The second, a text delimiter specifying what string we want to use to separate our elements. The second parameter should be optional, and if not passed, the default delimiter should be a semicolon. Let's get started. Okay, here we are in 4D version 11, and we're in a demo database here in the home view of the Explorer, and I already have a couple of folders set up for us. One is the array routines folder. The other is a subfolder called array routine test, which will hold our test case methods. And you can see there's already one routine in here, and we're going to actually be using that routine in our work. First thing I'm going to do is launch UnitTester. Here's UnitTester, and we already have one test suite set up with our test method for array clear, and you can see it's working. What we're going to be using here is a tool called the method creator. It's part of UnitTester. And what this tool does is it allows us to create two methods simultaneously. One, the production method, which this area up here is all about, and the other is our test case method, which we can define where it's supposed to be created here. So I'm going to go ahead and write our production method information here. Alright, our return variable name is going to be delimited string, and I've set up some code conventions as part of UnitTester, the ability to set your own code conventions so that it will detect automatically data types based on your prefixes or suffixes. Okay, the parameters, we're going to have an array text pointer, and we're going to have a delimiter, which will be type text, optional. And we want to be in our array routine tests suite folder. Okay, now we have just created two methods automatically. The first one that we're looking at right here, this is our test case method for our array to string production method. Behind this method is our production method. Let's take a look at our production method quickly. You can see that what's happened is UnitTester has set up our parameters and assigned them appropriately for us. There's no functional code yet, and we want to keep it that way until we've written our first test. But I just put a placeholder there for our functional code. Back to our test case method. UnitTester set it up for us and actually already wrote the first test for us, which is right here, which is default to failing. So I'm going to go ahead and launch UnitTester one more time and show you that here's our new test case, and I'm going to run it with the keyboard shortcut. And it's, as we would expect, it's already failing, and that's good. But what we want to do now is think about what we would like to test for our production method, and we're going to do this before we write a bit of production code. And one that comes to mind for me is we want to test the case when we're not passing the optional second parameter. So we're going to be relying on our default delimiter. So I'm going to call this test our default delimiter test. And we're going to need a text array to pass to our production method. So I'm going to define that up here in the setup section, and I'm also going to make our pointer point to that text array. We don't have to do this, but this was all generated. This pointer was generated for us automatically, and it's already set to be passed to our production method, which is what's going on right here. Now I plan on writing a few more tests in the next part of this series, and so I'm going to go ahead and copy what was automatically generated for us, comment it out, and we'll be using that in the next part of this series. Okay, well, back to our test we're working on right now. Since we don't want to pass the optional parameter, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And we don't need our delimiter set up in our test here. What we do need to do is go ahead and set up our array, and I'm going to make sure that in case we were to want to move around our tests in different orders later, I'm going to make sure that array is starting from scratch. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a 4-element array, and I'm going to call each element lm plus its index to make sure that they are unique. Okay, so we should end up with a string containing lm1, lm2, lm3, lm4. Of course, we're going to have an array containing those elements, but what we're saying here is that our expected result from our call to our production method should give us this exact string. And what we're going to end up doing is in this line here, we're calling an assertion. We're saying we're asserting that this is equal to that. Expected and result are the same. If that isn't true, then we fail our test. We can go ahead and get rid of this default unit fail call, which forces the test to fail no matter what. At this point, it looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and launch UnitTester one more time, run our test, and we're still failing, which we would expect because we haven't written a single line of production code yet. But at least we are getting a little bit of information here in our failure. It's telling us that we're expecting this string, and what we're receiving at this point is an empty string. So our next step in our test-driven development cycle is to now write the production code necessary to make our test pass. So I'm going to go ahead and I think we're going to want a for loop to cycle through our array, and we're assuming this array is a pointer to that this pointer is a pointer to a text array, which maybe is not a safe assumption, and I think what we're going to want to do in future tests is test for the cases what happens when we pass a pointer that's not the right type of pointer. But for now, I'm going to just real quickly and not very carefully put together our functional code here. I'm going to go back to UnitTester, and I know this code isn't going to work perfectly, but at least UnitTester will be able to show us how close we're getting. Okay, well, it looks like we're getting our string, but we're not getting any delimiters. So the reason for that is pretty obvious. We haven't set up our default delimiter yet. So I'm going to go ahead and put the default to be the semicolon and go back to UnitTester, run it again. Getting closer, it's looking close, but there's our problem. We have a trailing delimiter. We don't want that in there. So fortunately, 4D version 11 has this new command called choose, which will allow us to handle this situation very cleanly. I like this command. Okay, so I'm just saying that as long as we're not the last element, we're going to add a delimiter. Otherwise, we're not adding a delimiter. Back to UnitTester, we'll run the test one more time, and voila, we are passing. So we have completed the first cycle, the first round of the test-driven development cycle for this production method, the array text to string method. Our next step is to continue the cycle with other tests, which we'll do in the next part of this series.